Hello and welcome to Melodies of Life, Existential Philosophy and Gaming. I'm TriumphantBass, and I'm excited to be here to talk to you about the messages of several games close to my heart. Hold on, let me actually switch to slide mode again. Before we begin, I just want to quickly preface saying that I am neither a mental health professional nor a philosopher. Everything I share today comes from my personal experience with these games and the reading I've done to support them in philosophical terms. Naturally, this panel does come with a content warning for frequent discussions of death in an abstract sense. While this panel is meant to provide assurance, I understand the topic can be distressing. There will be a spoiler warning for all of the games mentioned on my outline on the next slide, as it's unavoidable for properly discussing them. Lastly, I don't want to diminish any religious or other views, but this panel is written with the assumption of oblivion, no afterlife to follow. Regardless of beliefs, the focus of this panel is on the end of life here as we know it on Earth. Moving on to the outline. So all the games up there will be the ones that we speak to today. There are several games I've played that have provided meaning in my life, pondering the same questions I have. The examples we'll be talking about today are some of the standouts. Many of these are bittersweet, but they all contain some hope or solace. Today I'll be talking about Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker, Outer Wilds and its expansion Echoes of the Eye, the Danganronpa and Nier series, Persona 3, and Spiritfarer. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful blue star. So I want to begin with the broadest question there is: why do we exist? In the world of Final Fantasy XIV, thousands of years before the main story, there existed a world of the ancients, specialized in creation magic, designing concepts that became the flora and fauna seen in the present day: sarks, horses, ashotls, etc. They are frequently compared to the ancient Greek, with many Greek names and words being used in their society, such as their research facility, Elpis, named after the spirit of hope, the last content of Pandora's box. One such man, Hermes, is about to be promoted to a high council position. What should be a joy causes him a great deal of distress and indecision, as it means his mentor he's taking the seat from will be retiring and passing on. Hermes falls into a depressive funk, unable to reconcile the point of his work creating life, unable to find meaning in life itself when all is destined to end. To try and alleviate his despair, he had a personal project. He made a flock of bird scouts, the media, who I'll refer henceforth as the singular medion, to explore the stars and report back on what various civilizations consider the meaning of life to be. Unfortunately, on the journey, none could give her an answer. She visited countless dead and dying worlds, the dead ends, a world that fell to disease, a world that solved disease but fell to war, a world that solved both yet found themselves drowned in apathy. As an empath, this experience proved too much for her and plunged the flock into despair. Without a reason for life, she began to consider all suffering needless and resolved to end all life, kickstarting a chain reaction of despair that ended the ancients' world, an apocalypse she was primed to repeat in the present day with Endwalker. Initially, I was going to treat Endwalker the same as any other game in this panel, to talk a bit about the themes and messages and how they tie back to existential philosophy, then move on to the next game. But as it developed, I realized I could use it in a special way. On my outline, you can see I split it into part 1 and part 2, bookending my panel. Rather than talk about any meaning now, I'd like to use it to set the stage as a narrative wrapping for everything else we're going to do today. Much like Medion, we'll be setting off to visit a number of worlds, trying to find some sort of meaning in a sea of conflicting noise. While each section has a distinct focus, you'll find there's a lot that will bleed together through these games, as philosophy does not exist in a vacuum. We'll hear thoughts of philosophers, therapists, theologians, doctors, caretakers, and they'll frequently reference both their contemporaries and those who came before them. As a nod to this wrapper and bleed, I'll occasionally pop in a chippy medion interjected next to a quote on a slide. That would be a quote from her, such as, "Even stars die." And this brings us to Outer Wilds, learning to accept the end. I absolutely loathe that I have to spoil Outer Wilds. It is truly a game you can only experience once, but it is a game unavoidable to talk about here, a game about accepting the end. The premise is simple. You're a plucky young astronaut ready for your first flight, and about 20 minutes into it, the sun explodes, and you find yourself stuck in a time loop. You need to solve the mystery of why. Naturally, players faced with that premise imply another objective that wasn't actually stated, and figure out how to stop it. That's the rub. There's no stopping this. This is not a puzzle game. This is a murder mystery, and the culprit is natural causes. Entropy. The universe is reaching its natural end, and every single star is going supernova. You dart across the solar system, picking up leads from logs of the long-dead Nomai civilization, among other clues. You find damning quotes in their project to find the eye of the universe, such as, "Science compels us to explode the sun," and you begin to think this is something they did in hubris, as they tried to power the firing of a probe cannon in a random direction by exploding the sun, sending the results back in time 20 minutes, and trying again. But as you continue to explore and get a better view of the bigger picture, you find they weren't responsible for this at all. They had canceled their project, and later after that, long before the game, they were wiped extinct in a flash by a toxic ruptured comet. Everything that had been set in motion just got triggered when the sun actually did go supernova. There's something to be said for different strategies of death acceptance, both as the player reacting to information, how your handful of fellow astronauts process it all. What I'd like to focus here is the role of heroism, specifically as it's talked about by anthropologist Ernest Becker in his book, The Denial of Death. That is, trying to mitigate the fear of inevitable death by giving ourselves cosmic significance, a sense that we're special, that we have meaning. Becker calls back to Maslow, describing humans as both worms and gods, capable of complex thought, considering meaning, yet still beholden to natural animal processes like death. And this central paradox is what Becker focuses on, the anxiety that results from the human paradox that man is an animal who is conscious of his animal limitation. And this heroism, our character, is meant to shield us from the full weight of the world. Becker and others talk not only of the fear of death, but the fear of life, which also often go hand in hand. He cites theologian Rudolf Otto, who describes overwhelming awe, wonder, and fear at the face of creation, of the miracle that there are things at all. And himself says that we perceived all of the beauty and terror of the world, we would be paralyzed and unable to act. In fact, one of your crewmates falls into the same paralysis if you visit him near the end of a loop. Outer Wilds is focused on this paradox, both being overwhelmed by the universe and yet terrified of it going away, trying to have cosmic significance even when all the stars around you are dying. It's a game where your progression is gained by acquiring knowledge, and despite of the fact that said knowledge will not change your fate. As a player, you have a natural sense of heroism and natural narcissism that you are special, that you can fix everything, that you can win the game. And the game involves confronting that notion and breaking it down as you learn more of your situation. The Denial of Death's heroism manifests in the Kasasui Project, or Immortality Project, the idea of finding meaning for yourself that transcends your life, creating symbolic immortality. It can manage the terror of your individual death and give you meaning if you have the sense that your impact will continue for some time beyond your life. There are many forms this project can take, such as having a family or writing works for the future. Generationalism means a sense of immortality by knowing that life itself goes on. You see this throughout the game, learning from the long-dead Nomai to fulfill their legacy and reach the eye of the universe. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. You didn't need to solve anything. Either way, the universe dies, but the game is far more satisfying when you find meaning in unraveling the mystery. I love one of the game's final quotes, right as you say goodbye to the universe and usher in a new one. I learned a lot by the end of everything. The past is past now, but that's okay. It's never really gone completely. The future is always built on the past, even if we won't get to see it. We're not done with Outer Wilds yet. Sometime after release, Outer Wilds did get DLC, Echoes of the Eye, which was surprising given the nature of the base game and the finality of it all, but it makes perfect sense as a foil. A story not about accepting death, but about repression of it. In Echoes of the Eye, you wander onto an abandoned space station known as the Stranger, but unlike the Nomai, who kept records preserved for the future, the people of this station learned of the impending end of the universe and were terrified by this knowledge. They burned their records and tried to forget. We don't have a translator for their language. They don't even have an official name. For ease, we'll use the fan name, the Owl Elk, because of how they look there as owls with antlers. What they could not unlearn was hidden away in darkness, obfuscated, and then lost. We find that they were so driven by pangs of nostalgia that instead of facing their reality in the space station and trying to make a life, they structured to look like their home planet and trying to make a life there, they instead chose to retreat into a virtual world, a simulation of it, where their consciousness remained as ghosts in the machine long after their passing. Rather than a symbolic immortality project, they focused on a more practical one, being locked in their past, completely suppressed death, and tried to sustain themselves indefinitely. The last pull I'm going to make of the denial of death for right now is the irony it notes, that we strive to be free of the anxiety of death, but we only have that anxiety due to being alive, and that suppressing that prevents us from being fully alive. At the individual level, some escapism and avoidance of death isn't wholly unhealthy. It is part of that armor that we talked about. The Owl Elk were happy. Ignorance was bliss, but it wasn't truly living even before they became ghosts. They retreated from society. They retreated from their outside world to live alone among their digital memories. They chained up like the only person who disagreed with all of this. They were so afraid of death that they became afraid of living their lives and became as if they were already dead. And while their end was the same, wiped out just like the Nomai, they let nostalgia keep them from having any future or any proof they existed. By not wanting to see their story end, they ensured said story was lost. Stories always end, so even if we can't remember that, we should always write some for the future. Think of all those before us who influenced our own lives. Symbolic or immortality may not preserve our consciousness, but we can still pay forward the story of our lives. The Owl Elk's retreat is a shining example of the fear of death causing a fear of being truly alive. I've said my piece of Outer Wilds, but I wanted to have the story of the Owl Elk fresh on our mind as I continue on to the next few worlds. Next up is Nier. Nier as a whole is a bittersweet look at existence. I like to use the Japanese term mono no aware, describes a general feeling of melancholy for life itself, both an appreciation and a sadness for how ephemeral everything is. First off, I want to draw focus to a pair of characters from Nier Replicant and Gestalt, Devila and Popola. They are twin sisters, Bardin the librarian and their town's respected mayors. They are also androids, tasked with the great burden of being the caretakers of the survival of the human race. In the prologue, 1400 years before the start of the game, a cataclysmic event causes human souls, gestalts, to leave their bodies, and the twins have been watching over the replacement bodies, the replicants, until they're ready to receive them. Except, this proves to be a near impossible task. Over the next generation, those replicants, the hollow shells, have begun to develop wills of their own, genuine human emotions. The gestalts are becoming restless shades. The weight of the world has fallen on these two, the only things keeping them going being their duty, their bond, and the simple pleasures of books, drinks, and music. But how long can that sustain you? I know that this world is full of more beauty than we can ever see, but 1,000 years, that would be your 10 closest friends all lived a long 100 years, and you experienced every single moment of their existence in a row. To do the same job for generations and generations, barely holding it together as you watch it crumble. The bittersweet realization knowing that they would cross blades with Nier, a resident they treated like a son, because he was the replicant earmarked for the lead Gestalt Shadow Lord, with the general knowledge that the village they watched over and came to care for ran counter to their duty. When Devila falls, Popola breaks down, the last straw keeping each sane, was their connection. They were created as twins because their role as caretakers would be crushingly lonely and empty without a human connection, without that sense of companionship. Their job was strained before, but Popola breaks down yelling in tears that she can't be alone. Grimoire Weiss sums it up best. Those two have watched the world wither for time immemorial. The cruelness of such a fate is difficult to imagine. In a human lifetime, there is a lot of pain we can heal from. There's a lot more we can ever learn. Thousands, millions of years, it becomes almost impossible to retain that attachment to life. You could read every book in every language, walk every inch of the world, climbing every mountain, fording every stream. Nothing would feel new. Bad memories would pile up with nothing new to hope for. Going back to Becker, he cites Concordat, who cautions that postponing death doesn't alleviate fears of it. It's found to amplify it, amplify the fear of dying prematurely, fearing a life cut short by 900 years rather than 90. Even if the project hadn't fallen apart, even if there were no losses, I would like to directly invoke an Endwalker world, the immortal world of complete harmony, one that solved disease and strife. When asked what they live for, couldn't provide an answer. There's even a sad irony that Medion prodded them with an impossible question is possibly what drove them to their worldwide suicide. Zooming too far out from our human perspective of life makes the greatest joys seem even less than routine, dreams meaningless. Could you still feel accomplishment given millennia to work on a task? Would you still feel joy at the birth of your 20th to the power grandchildren? Short aside there, I did tuck in that Detroit Become Human dunk tweet in there. I did it for a reason. Much of Nier does ask the question of if we can really learn to be human, and that's not just like robots. I know it's got a robot cast, but in asking that, you do have to ask what being human is. Replicant turns some of this on its head with its imagery of humans, the gestalts being monstrous shades, while the replicants, for all intents and purposes, look human. The idea of can a human be human is not as simple as it sounds. Existential crises have informed everything we have and will talk about today. None of us are immune to the human condition. Learning to be human is hard. And I think of Nier, the writings that come to mind the most of Niche, who wasn't gloating when he claimed God was dead and life was meaningless. He was genuinely sad and distressed, wanting to find a right answer, and Nier puts you in several of those situations. The alleged story of him breaking down in tears in front of a horse, saying that I understand you, that would not feel out of place as a story in Nier. Back to the main. The Book of Ecclesiastes has a surprisingly secular look at existentialism, bringing up ideas that there is ultimately nothing new under the sun that hasn't been seen in past generations, stories retold and reworked. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain, even at night their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in all the toil. Just in general, Nier isn't about eternity just on an individual level. It's about the endless cycle of birth and death and rebirth in the world. The Drakengard and Nier timeline is twisty. Events repeat again and again, particularly in the aptly named third game, Nier Reincarnation. These have invoked the Buddhist reincarnation cycle Samsara, but I'm going to table that. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'm going to have one other aside. Another replicant character, Emil, survived to the time of Automata as the last human, cursed with immortality. This drove him mad. His long-dead friends instilled in him the values of the world that was worth fighting for. But thousands of years of doing so was an uphill battle that left him completely detached and jaded. The world had no meaning, he yelled. It screamed at us. I want to stress again here that even in a long human lifespan, we can all find meaning all the way to our dying gasp. We can recover from traumas, break free from boredom, create new connections, but a long life is not the same as immortality. The natural extreme of not dying, living thousands, millions, billions of years is incomprehensible. It's natural to want more time, but longer and forever are not the same. But that's not the note I'm going to leave Nier on. What I want to set up as a segue is ending D of Nier Automata to hammer home a common theme and ask us if we consider life meaningless. And upon receiving an answer to that question, it would ask us if we would give up our save files, our memory, to help someone we do not know do the same challenge we faced, which segues into our next game. Where to begin? Danganronpa is a franchise laden with despair in a way that I can only scratch the surface of here, but a quick primer for previously on Danganronpa. Got Junko and her twin sister are the ultimate despairs. Junko in particular, initially known as the ultimate analyst, had a talent for seeing trends, just having a lot of foresight for the world, and this is what led her to despair, seeing all the ways that ended. She just got bored of life and wanted to set things on fire to feel something. And she did so by sparking the biggest, most awful, most tragic event in human history, herefore referred to as the tragedy. The sisters orchestrate a series of killing games, the first of which in Danganronpa 3 kills beloved Chiaki Nanami and sparks a chain reaction of self-propagating despair. Sound familiar? Chiaki's classmates fall to this and become the remnants of despair, becoming active participants, rioting and fueling the tragedy. And aside here, a big way the despair grows and spreads in these games isn't the killings themselves, but the realization that the outside world is just as broken and despair-filled as the environments the players are trapped in. Escape from the game won't save them from despair. The remnants are eventually caught by the Future Foundation, specifically the survivors of Danganronpa 1, who attempt to put them into a simulation to rehabilitate them, but Junko's AI hijacks it to form another killing game. After several in-game deaths, there is a final trial with the surviving remnants provided two options. Repeat, they continue living in the simulation with their friends alive, and graduate. They wake up and retain their island memories, but everyone who died in the game is likely brain dead in real life. The caveat is revealed in this option that Junko gets uploaded into all these bodies. And I must remind you, this is a rehabilitation program, so like they all were a lot nicer by the end of this and basically had a real risk to regress to like the same people who caused all this incident. And now you can see why I segued in the Nier section there with the save files. This is expanded to a third option for shutdown, where Junko is erased and the dead stay likely dead, but they don't retain their memories of the island, meaning the survivors would regress back to those ultimate despairs, making everything they worked for a failure. This devil's bargain carries a little extra weight because the Future Foundation as a whole doesn't approve of the idea of rehabilitation, something the surviving Danganronpa 1 members took a risk on. This trial sparks debate over which option brings the most hope or despair, with the remnants at some points being viewed as collateral in the larger equation. This skirts with moral philosophy, the idea that the remnants were either beyond saving, not worth the risk, or that simply sacrificing them or leaving them in the situation would be the best outcome. But this isn't the moral philosophy panel. This is the existential philosophy panel. We're beyond good and evil, not that second one. This isn't about making the correct choice. It's about making the best of a bad situation and making the one you believe in. And yes, I realize that also falls under moral philosophy, but every choice you make in life is. So If you do like your trolley problems and such, I will send you along to the Kadaka side of the other side of the 100-line collab, and you can just go hang out in Zero Escape, which is rife with them. But ultimately, the surviving remnants choose forced shutdown, losing all the memories of the island and preventing Junko's return. They wouldn't really be living stuck in the simulation loop, and they were willing to risk falling back in despair if it meant they could stop Junko. The choice here represents something important: the acceptance of uncertain futures, living in the present, and having convictions strong enough to accept those risks. And something special happened. It happened off-screen, so it's never fully elaborated, but a few months after Danganronpa 2, the remnants had regained their hope. I choose to believe that the catalyst was simply hearing the truth, that their alternate selves inside that simulation chose this option because they had hope for the future, and that hearing some version of them had that hope was enough to spark that same hope in their present selves and put them again on the path to healing. Chiaki's posthumous words embody this and show a sense of peace. Even if I cease to exist, even if you guys never remember me again, that doesn't mean I will completely disappear. As long as everyone continues to move forward towards the future we created together, I will never disappear. What I live for, fought for, and risked my life for will still exist. The hopeful Chiaki's demise sparked the tragedy, but the ideals that live beyond her help to end it. No one remembers the simulation, just like we won't be able to remember our lives. But the simulated remnants were filled with the conviction that their actions would influence the future, even if they weren't remembered, as we saw in Outer Wilds, and there is a beauty in that. Again, like what generations past have done for us, or like the idea of the butterfly effect, that even if unknown, our influence will continue, even in some ways beyond the people who actually knew us. And next one, we have Persona 3, Confronting the Absurd. Persona 3 is a game filled to the brim with imagery of death and time. Every party member is equipped with a gun that invokes a powerful reminder of their mortality, and the general populace has started to succumb to apathy syndrome, a lack of a will to live, which culminates in people wishing for the logical extreme, the extinction of all life on Earth, an event known as the Fall. Persona 3 again asks that question: why bother doing anything when we'll all die anyways and not remember a thing? Which, not an uncommon idea in this panel, as I said in the setup. All existential philosophy bleeds together. In particular, the philosophers I focus on in this section are known to those in previous sections. But this specific line of thought is the tenet of the school of philosophy known as absurdism, the idea that the world is uncaring and meaningless, and that humans believe in meaning for themselves. Neither statement is absurd alone, but both statements coexisting is. Albert Camus is a famed absurdist philosopher. He notes, "If I see a man armed only with a sword attack a group of machine guns, I shall consider the act to be absurd. But it is so solely by the virtue of the disproportion between intention and the reality that will be encountered, of the contradiction I notice between true strength and the aim held in view." Absurdism is the idea that we will not win against death in the long run, but that shouldn't stop us from facing life with conviction. Another of his essays, The Stranger, follows a man who goes along with wrongful conviction and execution, thinking he wouldn't remember it later anyways, comparing his situation to equal of his mother peacefully passing in a retirement home. The equivalence is the logical extreme of apathy syndrome and the Fall, so focused on the end that we don't care about what's happening now, going through a terrible situation and thinking, this is fine. We don't eat food to remember what it tastes like a week later. We eat it because it tastes good now. With the rule of threes, I also have to point out that there is a third great essay from Camus, The Fall, which happens to share the name of Persona 3's cataclysmic event. The protagonist will die at the end, 1 year into the game, whether peacefully as part of the Fall or as the cost they pay to prevent it. The end result is the same. The protagonist will die exactly when they do, forgetting everything, unaware of the outcome. But absurdism says to act defiantly against your futile fate, which the protagonist does, fighting death itself and preventing extinction at the cost of their own life. I'm not going to talk about Hades, I just wanted to tack on the screenshot to perfectly illustrate Camus's essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, looking at the idea of a Sisyphean task from a different angle, not as punishment, but how Sisyphus loved life so much that he tried to cheat death. His punishment, rolling a stone up a mountain that you always fall back down on, is a lot like life. There is a joy in the struggle to new heights, even if you know that you will ultimately fall. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Unlock. An article which I've linked in my sources already made the connection between Persona 3 and theologian Soren Kierkegaard, specifically his idea of a knight of faith. Two knights, both faced with an impossible task and knowing the futility to behave in different ways. One knight, seeing the futility, gives up on his goals, becoming the knight of infinite resignation. The other knows the aim is futile, but takes action anyways, becoming the knight of faith. And those represent the two extremes we have available. We will die. Do we spend our time lamenting that fact in inaction and resignation? Or do we take action, work towards our aims, cultivating our bonds with other people, having the faith and the meaning we've defined for our lives? And also, one other thing I just want to tack on with Persona 3, I do love the game. The base release doesn't let you finish all of your social links in one go, but it's just kind of choosing how to spend your time is meaningful there. But leaving with this beautiful quote from the epilogue. All things eventually come to an end. Every living thing will one day disappear. Only by accepting this can one discover what they truly want, what the meaning of their life will be. We have a finite, unknown amount of time in this life, and that is scary to think about. But rather than being overcome by despair, anxiety, or apathy, we should use our fears to eliminate what we care about in life, our goals, our connections with other people. And it comes time to bookend our journey by properly revisiting and concluding Endwalker. The despair that had laid dormant for thousands of years bubbled up again in the present day, Medion threatening what she considered a mercy killing for the entire universe, so entrenched in her belief that in the absence of a concrete reason for living, all life consisted of was meaningless suffering. In spite of all odds, the player character and their allies stand resolute and prevail, their force of will and hope for the world overpowering her and causing a change of heart, a touching realization from her. What they live for, what gives their lives meaning, there was never a single answer. You gather pieces of happiness, precious and fragile, only to lose them, then start again. Like a field of flowers, at first a single blossom that spreads and takes on more colors. Medion finally has an answer that satisfies her. There's no reason we exist, and we will experience pain throughout our lives, but in spite of this, there is a joy and a beauty in life. It may feel dehumanizing to be compared to a flower, but the point is, despite all of our ability to question why, to feel the terror other life will know, we are part of nature and part of the beauty of it. Like Medion's journey, not a single world we visited today could give us a definitive answer to the meaning of life. Our philosophers, theologians, and others all had differing ideas with no one right answer. But in spite of this, a lot of it converged on the idea that it is indeed worth trying to find meaning in the meaningless, to acknowledge that we should still strive for something in spite of it all, to simply try to find joy in the ephemeral nature of life and make peace with it all, rather than trying to ignore it all and shield us from experiencing life. The answer to Hermes' questions could be considered a spiritual one. As the title of this section implies, this also is the resolution to the main song of Final Fantasy XIV's 1.0, the song Answers, which poses the riddle of life, why, given life, we are meant to die, and resolves with saying that with our fleeting time, we need to live, die, and know. To take in the majesty of the universe And as our lives are built on those who came before us, we should learn to live in a way that both makes peace with that and supports life going on. Transcendentalists like Henry David Thoreau and Waldo Emerson spoke of the experience of being connected to a nature bigger than ourselves. The latter described individual experiences as transparent eyeballs, the universe's way of describing itself. I'm personally quite fond of the Buddhist metaphor from Thich Nhat Hanh, also used in The Good Place. When we look at the ocean, we see that each wave has a beginning and an end, but if we look more deeply, we see that a wave is made of water. While living the life of a wave, it also lives the life of water. It would be sad if the wave did not know that it is water. It would think, someday I will have to die. This period of time is my lifespan, and when I arrive at the shore, I will return to non-being. These notions cause the wave fear and anguish. We become arrogant when things go well. We become afraid of falling, being low or inadequate. But these are relative ideas, and when they end, a feeling of completeness or satisfaction arises. We need the relative world of the wave. We also need to touch the water, the ground of our being, to find real peace and joy. As much fear and despair as there may be at being someone who will end, there is a peace at knowing we're part of a much larger world, a joy in knowing that life will go on and regrow again and again. We may only get a small glimpse into the universe, and while all roads may lead to dead ends, whether heat death, some other disaster, or man-made strife, it is beautiful that it exists, that we get to see it now, and that others will in the future. It may be cliche to say that life is about the journey and not the destination, but it's true. Ours will end, and while it can work, we can work to make better futures if that gives us meaning. Much like our individual lives, there's no perfect end game for the world. There's a peace in just enjoying it while we're here. And I want to end the panel on a slightly different note, not asking a question, but leaving a meditative space and providing one final game that can serve as a comfort, Spiritfarer. Unlike the others, it is less of a narrative I can summarize the impact of and something better experienced firsthand. The premise is simple. You, Stella, have taken over for the ferryman Charon, and you're to take lost souls onto your boat and properly send them. But where in some interpretations soul sending can be more abstract, it takes a very human touch here. Stella gives her charges warm meals, soft hugs, listens to their stories, providing some final comforts as they pass on. I appreciate the idea of an epilogue of life. One of the revelations during the game is that Stella was a palliative care nurse during life. I know not everyone will have the chance to have that bookend, but many will reach a point where the end is near. Regardless, so long as we're alive, it's important to care for each other in whichever form that manifests. I can't say it's an entirely cozy games. The spirits within have lived varied lives that ended in many ways, and saying goodbye is never easy, but I want to leave it here as recommendation for an important reason. Philosophy, understanding how we feel about life, is an important tool, but no matter the answers, it's important that we love and care for each other. We're all approaching the same end, but on this journey, we can give each other comfort, solace, and belonging. Beauty in life is once again made through our connections. There is one thing that has helped my understanding of life, meaning, depression, and everything under that umbrella. It is that ruminating on philosophy in a vacuum can only get you so far. It's important to want to understand, but it's also important to simply experience, to truly go out and live life, interact with others, and experience it all firsthand. One final quote from Robert Pantano. Perhaps there are no ultimate answers in philosophy. Perhaps there will never be. But there are no ultimate answers in music, art, a beautiful landscape, or a conversation with a friend, and yet I know of no one who does not find value, insight, love, or solace in all of these things. My references here, and one little bonus one. Of course, I've only touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of philosophy and games to weave the story I wanted to tell today. I'd encourage you to go out and find others and explore their meanings. My panel's namesake, Melodies of Life, is Final Fantasy IX. Majora's Mask focuses on life in spite of impending despair, It in turn heavily inspired Lightning Returns, a game about extraordinarily long life in slow decline. I've mentioned the Zero Escape series and all the directions it goes. Thousand X Resist has a lot to say about existing in a hostile world with generational trauma. Metaphor Refantasio's social links are great about coping with various aspects of life. I know there's a heavy Square bias, but Final Fantasy VI is about rebuilding hope in a hopeless world. Umaneko has some thoughts. Hell, even Shadow Generations has things to say about how to live and learn in the present in spite of painful tragedy. And that brings us to Journey's End. I'm glad to have delved into some games.